My new record's called The River and the Thread, and it's a collaboration with my husband, John Leventhal. We wrote all the songs together, and they're all songs about the South. It's kind of both a geographical landscape and a time travel landscape and an emotional, spiritual landscape. You know, I was born in Memphis, but I've been a New Yorker for 23 years, so I had the benefit of perspective about the South when we started taking some recent trips down there. This series of trips started in 2011 because Arkansas State University had wanted to purchase my dad's childhood home. And they asked if the family wanted to be involved in the restoration and the creation of a museum, but more a music heritage site. So I was very interested in that. There's a lot of Johnny Cash projects that come across my desk, and I say no to all of them. But that one was inspiring to me, not only because I knew how important it would be to my dad, but because how important it would be to my kids. We have to fly into Memphis to get to this part of Arkansas, and I was born in Memphis. So I went back to Memphis, reconnected with my cousin who was still there, and Natalie Channon, who's in Alabama, has this workshop, and she and her team hand-stitched these beautiful clothes that's all I wear in concert anymore, these beautiful hand-stitched beaded clothes. So I wanted to learn to sew, and I went down to see her, and she was threading my needle, and she said, "You have to love the thread." And she wasn't speaking in metaphors, but I took it that way. And tears came into my eyes, and I started thinking about the thread that goes from there through Mississippi and Tennessee and Arkansas, that is part me and my family, and part the music and the depth of the literature and music that came out of this part of the country. And revolution, you know, the civil rights movement began just down the road. So it was all deeply inspiring, and the songs started coming. You know, when you're a kid, you take in things on one level. It's kind of egocentric, it's all about me. And as I've gotten older, and as I spent a long time away from the South and going back, I was really moved by the depth of things I didn't realize in the past on so many levels. Musically, you know, I mean, of course I appreciated the music that came out of the Delta, but then just to go to these places and see where the greatest blues musicians came from, and visit Robert Johnson's grave, and start tracing the line from music from the Delta to what I was doing. Not that I'm a blues artist or claim to be in any way, but then to reconnect with my extended family who are still in the South, and my father's birthplace, and where he grew up in Arkansas. And then to move it forward, you know, that my son is a fifth-generation New Yorker on my husband's side, and yet one generation back on my side, they were cotton farmers. It's kind of mind-blowing. So to just connect those dots there. And as John and I started going, he conceptualized this. He said, we could write songs about this and have it be a themed record. And, you know, some kind of narrative. I mean, I did the most old-fashioned thing you can imagine. I made a concept album. But ever since childhood, that's what I've loved most of all, is albums that were one piece, you know, that had a narrative, or that the characters reappeared. So it feels satisfying. It was outside of my normal songwriting instinct. I felt a little self-conscious about trying to write third-person narratives about either creating people or reimagining the lives of real people, but it got easier as it went along, and it was really exciting. After we wrote the first song, which was Etta's tune, which was about Marshall and Etta Grant. Marshall was my dad's original bass player in the Tennessee 2, and he was married to Etta for 65 years. And she said that every morning of their lives they said, "What's the temperature, darling?" when they first woke up. I said, "Oh, that's so sweet, you know, what a great way to start the day." And John said, "That's the first line of a song." So we wrote Etta's tune. And then it started to come into focus. And we wrote "A Feather's Not a Bird," and the landscape kind of laid out. All of those places showed up in the song, you know, Alabama and Florence, Alabama, and Memphis and Arkansas and Mississippi. All of it was right there. And it felt like an urgency. There was an urgency to that journey. And then the other songs started falling into place. John had been working with Derek and Susan on their last record. He co-wrote a song with them, and you know, he had been down to Florida to hang with them in the studio a few times. And John, oddly enough, did not want to play any solos on the record, any guitar solos. And I couldn't get around that, but he just said it's so typical, you know, they just throw solos in every song. He didn't want to do it. So the one song that screamed for a guitar solo was World of Strange Design, and he asked Derek if he would play on it. So of course Derek came in and just did this most badass solo you can think of. And then John did a solo on Money Road, but it was an electric sitar instead of a guitar, which was, you know, strangely cool. We were in Memphis and we were walking down Union Avenue right by Sun Records, and we saw this big billboard and it said WDIA, 50,000 watts of goodwill. I said, wow, that's so great, you know? And this station had been around forever. They used to play what was called race music in the South. You know, it was catered to a black audience, R&B and soul. But all of the guys who lived in Memphis then, Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis, my dad, Carl Perkins, everybody who came out of that rockabilly era listened to that station. It was hugely influential. And I had been thinking about writing a song about common prayer, about music being a common prayer. Even for those who don't believe in anything else, music can be the common prayer. So we put that together, 50,000 watts of common prayer. And John wrote this kind of clangy, can you give me an amen melody to it. And my really good friend Cory Chisel, I asked him to sing on it. He's got one of the greatest blue-eyed soul voices around. John had written this gorgeous melody, and it was in a strict tradition, like an Appalachian ballad tradition. The melody, you could just hear it. And Rodney Crowell, my ex, had written the lyrics. And I loved the song. I heard the song. I said, can I have that? And they said no, they had written it for Emmylou Harris. Well, at the same time, my son, who was 13, was doing a project on the Civil War. And I said to him, you know, we have ancestors on both sides. We had Confederate caches and Union caches. So I went on the Civil War database, and up popped this picture of William Cash in his uniform. There aren't that many pictures on the Civil War database, so it was like shocking and chilling. So I got a little obsessed with that, and I went into my own genealogy that I had, and I found this woman, Marianne Cash, who had been 20 years old at the start of the war and never had children. So I figured, oh, she either lost a husband or a fiance during the war and never married, or, you know. So I asked John again, I said, do you think I could ask Rodney if he would rewrite the lyrics to that melody as a Civil War ballad? He said, I don't know, you know, it's a little strange. But I just called Rodney and he said, yeah, I'll do that. So we rewrote the lyrics based on my real ancestors, and I got obsessed with this couple. I couldn't stop thinking about them. I woke up thinking about them. And the song was like a novel to me because I didn't know where it was going until it hit me where he was from, that he was going to die, you know. It was so sad. And I'd always wanted to write a song in that tradition of Appalachian or Celtic ballads. So it was really satisfying. So the song was finished, and John said, you know, we've got to have some kind of background vocals that has real gravitas, that really equals what the song is. So we were going down to Nashville, and we found out Chris Christopherson was going to be there too. And Rodney has a studio in his house. So we asked Chris to come over, and he said yes. And then Rodney says, well, you know, John Prine and Tony Joe White live in the neighborhood. Shall I ask them too? He said, let me think. Yeah, that's a good idea. So they all came over, and so the four of them sang this weighted, you know, Mount Rushmore sounding background part, Voice of God, background choir. It was so heavy. When Tony Joe came in the studio, you know, he greeted Chris like brother. They greeted like brothers. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. That would have been worth the price of admission just to see that. And then it was so bottom heavy, we had to put beautiful Amy Helm on the top just to lighten it up. But you know, I don't listen to the songs I record after I'm finished usually. You know, it's like you spend so much time writing and recording, mixing, and then it's done. Except for that song, When the Master Calls a Roll. I listen to it every couple of weeks, and it's like revisiting William and Mary Ann, and it's so moving to me. Yeah, I mean, both the river and the thread are metaphorical and real on every level. You know, the river is the Mississippi River, which is right there. And then that river of ancestry and music and art. And oddly enough, my grandmother's middle name was Rivers, so there's even that. And then the thread, like I said, Natalie saying to me, you have to love it and seeing it in a bigger way. Hi, I'm Rosanne Cash. Look for me on Last.fm.